On the Hawkeye Sports Network from Learfield, this is the Fight for Iowa podcast, brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy, proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Big Ten Conference. Also by Iowa's Corn Farmers of the Iowa Corn Growers Association and Iowa Corn Promotion Board. You may think Iowa grows corn, but the truth is, corn grows Iowa. Also brought to you by Scheels. We're right there with you in Des Moines, Sioux City, Iowa City, and Cedar Falls. This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
For those of us who think the summers fly by, Iowa football is 45 days out. Fall camp begins in less than a month. Opening day brings an FCS power to Kinnick Stadium. The Jackrabbits of South Dakota State powered their way to an 11-win season and a spot in the national semifinals last December. In fact, the Jacks have qualified for the football championship subdivision postseason each year for the last 10. Like Iowa Coach Kirk Ferentz, South Dakota State's John Stigelmeier knows the lay of the land. The winningest coach in school history, Stigelmeier's teams have won 185 games. Ferentz has won 178 in 23 seasons at Iowa, 190 overall. Coaches that want to be balanced, run to pass, and turnover-free. Tyler Merriam is in his 12th season as the radio play-by-play voice of South Dakota State. Tyler will give us some insight into what the Hawkeyes face on Labor Day weekend when we return with this week's Fight for Iowa podcast, courtesy of Scheels, Iowa Corn and Athletico.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
Oh, you know that old injury of yours? The one in your knee or maybe back? Instead of going to the doctor and then doing physical therapy, why not start with therapy first? Athletico Physical Therapy is changing the whole healing process around. Their physical therapists will find the source of your pain and help fix it. Start with them and start living pain-free. Just like that.
It all starts with Athletico Physical Therapy. Schedule your free assessment at athletico.com. No prescription needed. Proud partner of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
The Iowa Hawkeyes' reliable, contentious defense will square off against a South Dakota State team that averaged 440 yards a game en route to an 11-4 mark last season. The Jackrabbits weren't particular in how they got the job done either, running for 212 yards a game, throwing for 229. And defeating along the way second-ranked North Dakota State, number 8 Northern Arizona, third-rated Eastern Washington, and Division I opponent Colorado State. Behind quarterback Chris Oladokin, running backs Pierre Strong and Isaiah Davis, who combined for 2,400 rushing yards and 25 touchdowns, and the Yankee twins at wide receiver, the Jackrabbits put up 36 points a game and averaged 33 in 4 playoff contests. They were 6-2 in the Missouri Valley Conference, spent most of the year ranked in the top 5, and produced 6 All-Americans. Add in the spring schedule made up after COVID, and South Dakota State went 19-6. That's talent, toughness, and depth. Head coach John Stigelmeier grew up in the farming community of Selby, South Dakota, population 610. The radio play-by-play voice for South Dakota State is Tyler Merriam. With only 4 losing seasons out of 25, Merriam maintains the 65-year-old Stigelmeier has adapted to the times.
All you have to do is look at the different offensive weapons they've had over the years. A few years back, Jake Winnecke, who went on to have a cup of coffee in the NFL and now is a wide receiver in the CFL, and Dallas Goedert, an All-American tight end who's playing in the NFL. When the Jacks had those two receivers, they were a wide open offense scoring in the 40s and 50s often. And the last few years, they've turned into more of a ground game, more of a controlled offense. They've kind of flipped the book a little bit. And so Stig's thing is whatever works for this team is what we need to do. He's adapted well over the years. And it really is phenomenal when you talk about his tenure, Gary, because in the Division II era, when this all started, the Jacks were not a highly successful program. And moving to Division I, there were some people that wondered if this could be a successful program under John Stigelmeier. Well, 10 straight playoff appearances, 4 of the last 5 semifinals, and a trip to the national championship game in Frisco. I think he's proven his worth.
He sure has. Let's talk about some of the personnel. And obviously, you got to be able to recruit. at the FCS level, and the staff there at South Dakota State's done a phenomenal job. Chris Oladokun is off to the NFL, and yet there's not going to be much of a drop-off given good health at the quarterback position. Mark Gronowski was there 2 years ago as the number one guy. Tore his ACL. How's he doing? Is he ready to step in 2 years later?
He's doing really well. Everybody anticipates that he'll be the starting quarterback come that trip to Iowa City here in a few weeks. And again, we talk about 2 years ago. Let's just be honest, Gary. It was actually the spring of 2021. I mean, he tore it in the championship game in mid-May. And so obviously didn't play this past fall with the whole FCS deal of playing 2 seasons in one. It really was unique. And Gronowski missed all of fall. Oladokun stepped in, came out of nowhere, and ended up in the National Football League. It's a phenomenal story. But Gronowski helped him along in getting acclimated with SDSU because Oladokun was a kid from the Southeast that didn't know much about this area. And now Gronowski's back. He's a Chicago area kid. He's more of a running quarterback. He'll throw it some, but he'll run the football when he needs to. And this is a quarterback that's gritty, gutty, and he's a great leader, and everybody's rallied around him.
Now, you say Gronowski is more of a running quarterback. Pierre Strong, your All-American running back, ran for 1,700 yards last year. He's gone off to the NFL, but you've got capable guys that were just in the wings waiting, like Isaiah Davis, like Amar Johnson. Talk about those two first.
Well, Davis, first and foremost, was a kid from Missouri who was the player of the year in that state. And the folks at Missouri State, where Bobby Petrino currently is, his predecessor didn't recruit him. And people are always asking me down there, why didn't Davis get recruited? I go, I don't know. Jacks are happy to have him. Unbelievable high school career, physical running back. If you go back to the national championship game and watch some of the highlights, he has 2 long runs. He's throwing stiff arms left and right. He was an absolute bulldog. Got hurt during the fall, so was somewhat limited, which is why Strong's numbers were so high. But Davis is a physical runner who is fast as well, but very physical, loves to throw a stiff arm. And then Amar Johnson's more of like a scat back, if you will, a little quicker. So they balance each other very well. And the anticipation is Davis will be the guy, but Johnson will get some reps too. So you're going to see plenty of both of them as the anticipation come this fall.
So what do you expect with the change in quarterback styles, at least somewhat more than modest? What do you expect out of the receiving core? Because you've got the Yankee. Let's start with the Yankee brothers, the Yankee twins. Mm-hmm. They're very, very solid.
They are, and it's interesting. Jackson was a wide receiver in high school. Jaden was a running back, yet Jaden is more of the vertical threat, and Jackson they use as more of the physical screen receiver at times. So it's interesting, the juxtaposition of those two. But in reality, they're going to do very similarly to what they did late in that spring season, which is Gronowski's going to run 10, 12 times a game. You know, they'll do the RPOs where he can run or he can hand it off, and it'll be more of a controlled passing game. They're not going to have Gronowski drop back and send 5 guys down the field. That's just not their thing. They'll use the tight ends, and I'm sure we'll get into them a lot, and they'll use those 2 Yankees and then Wolf, more of a controlled situation where they'll take some shots deep, but it won't be an every play thing of we'll just see what happens. It'll be more situational and designed that way.
We like to think of Iowa's tight end down through the years, Dallas Clark, who was born in Sioux Falls. By the way, started the run under Kirk Ferentz, but I love the combination of Kraft and Hines. There's some NIL money waiting for those two, let me tell you. But Tucker Kraft, 65 catches, Zach Hines, 24, both average double-figure yardage receptions. You got a lot of options in that passing game.
Certainly do. Hines is just very long. I mean, he's 6'7" and can go up and get the football, so you can throw it up to him in any situation near the goal line, what have you. And Kraft is just a beast to take down. And he's somebody that the folks around here who coached Dallas Goedert, who again went on to the NFL, say he's just as good as Goedert, if not better, which is high praise. And so those two are incredibly talented. And again, we start talking about all these guys. If you're going to have both Kraft and Hines on the field at the same time, which they will, at some point you have to make a decision. Do you put a defensive back on them, which a smaller guy who's faster but smaller, then they can take advantage with their height? Do you put a bigger guy on him, and then potentially Kraft or Hines can use their speed? And it's similar to the mismatches the Iowa tight ends have been able to exploit over the years. So you certainly understand what I'm talking about.
Hawkeye fans know their tight ends, and Sam Laporta and Luke Lachey are poised to have solid seasons. Speaking of solid, South Dakota State's defense allowed just under 20 points a game and 3.3 yards per rush last season. The Jacks were led by a tackling machine from Solon High School. Our look at Iowa's season-opening opponent on Fight for Iowa will continue after this.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
There's a sense of pride that comes from the life of a farmer. How many people can say they have a famous tan named after them, or be known for their wave when they drive past neighbors and strangers alike on a two-lane road? Whether it's a farmer's tan or the farmer's wave, we are proud to be known for a lot of things. We feel that pride every night at the dinner table, knowing we feed our family and yours. Iowa Corn is proud to be on the sidelines cheering on the Iowa Hawkeyes. In Iowa, we grow corn, but the truth is, corn grows Iowa.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
FCS power South Dakota State invades Kinnick Stadium for the season opener September 3rd, following an 11-4 season a year ago and a spot in the national semifinals. The Jackrabbits defense terrorized opposing quarterbacks in 2021 with 37 sacks, notching 99 tackles for loss. With 21 interceptions and 7 fumble recoveries, this was an opportunistic group, according to play-by-play voice Tyler Merriam, and led by junior linebacker and former Solon High School star Adam Bach's 125 tackles. Bach had assistance from a dominating front four.
Was a veteran group, and what they did so well, and they emulated what a program like North Dakota State had done in the past, was to rotate through more guys. In the first few years of that playoff run, they were able to get to the playoffs but not go overly deep, in part because they were only playing maybe 5 or 6 defensive linemen. The last 2-3 years, they've gone where they'll play 10, 11 guys on the D-line and rotate a lot of bodies in, and it was a very senior-heavy defensive line. All those guys got an extra year, of course, because of COVID. And so because of all these fresh veteran defensive linemen, as I like to put it, Adam Bach got to keep his feet clean. Those D linemen kept the O linemen engaged, and Bach got to roam. And he's a very good open field tackler in space. And so when he's not trying to fight blocks from fullbacks, if we ever see him anymore, or tight ends, he's able to roam and make plays, and he's all over the field. He has a tremendous work ethic, very quick, and so made a lot of plays, like I said, in the open field, and those linebackers are heavily relied upon. The defensive line did a great job last year, and many of those guys have graduated, so there are some holes to fill there. But if they can do anywhere near what they did a year ago, a guy like Bach is set up to have another excellent season.
You mentioned the defense runs through that front four and that they were the catalyst a year ago. I guess that speaks volumes for why the secondary got 21 pickoffs, 21 interceptions.
Well, and again, part of it too is when you have big leads, you're forcing teams to throw more. Obviously, that played into their hands. They could be a little more opportunistic, but that secondary knew when to take chances. And then guys like Bach weren't afraid to make some plays too. And I think the D-line had 4 interceptions during the course of the season too, but very opportunistic defense that forced a lot of turnovers. Even in the games that SDSU lost, it wasn't because they didn't force turnovers. They just couldn't capitalize on all of them. But some of the more famous plays the Jacks had, including a 97-yard fumble return for a touchdown, was in a loss, but it was a heck of a play. So it's a very opportunistic defense, but it's not where it's over the top where they're too adventurous. Again, they start fairly safe up front, and they can take some chances in the secondary because of how well that front seven play.
What do you look for out of your special teams this year, Tyler?
Well, I think one of the big things will be there will be a change at kicker. Cole Fromm was a veteran who'd been there a number of years. He's not here anymore. So you're going to have a change. Not that you don't have somebody in place that can step in, and Hunter Dustman's probably the guy that'll do that, who's kicked a little bit here and there. But it will be a change. He's been a punter. Now he'll have to be a kicker as well. The Jacks have really utilized the return game in certain situations to great advantages. But more often than not, they're just taking the touchback, as we've seen with the changing in the rules. But John Stigelmeier does view the special teams game as incredibly valuable. He's not one that throws it off to the side. He really looks at it like it's a key third of the game. And the Jacks have had a lot of success over the years, whether it's been blocking punts or whatnot. They've had 2 blocked punts for touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. So they do view that as a very important part of the game. But I think the biggest thing is going to be, it'll be an unproven kicker. And so first first time that he really has to do it, whether it's Dustman or if somebody else beats him out, is going to be in front of 70,000 people at Kinnick Stadium, and that's a big ask. Well, again, it was last year so unique at the FCS level because, again, they played in the spring too. And so this team
good point.
Played 25 games in a span of about 11 months, which is, I mean, that's more than pro teams play. I mean, it's remarkable. And they went to the national championship game. And like we talked about, the starting quarterback blows his ACL in the opening quarter, and you lose in the final seconds in a game that easily could have been won. Just one of those games that goes down to the wire and things just didn't go SDSU's way. And then last fall, the Jacks really let 2 games get away and felt like they were deserving of being a top 4 seed, but lost 2 games they shouldn't have, had to go on the road and then won 3 straight playoff games to get to the semifinals. And then it eventually lost in the semis to a Montana State team that went to the national championship game. So they had a tremendous run and almost the same team from the spring to the fall. Again, insert a Ladokin at quarterback like we talked about, but almost the same team. So now you have almost 2 seasons put into one. Great success. They've been to the playoffs. They've made deep runs, and they feel like now with some new bodies, they can just keep it going. They don't feel like they have to rebuild. It's a reload scenario. There are some questions up front on both the offensive and defensive lines because that's really where they lose the most. Not that a Strong or an Oladokin isn't a valuable guy, but you feel like you have key pieces in place already. There's some young linemen on both sides that will have to step up. They feel like they can. But you and I both know until they actually do it, they haven't done it. So we can talk all we want. They need to go out and prove it.
Thanks to South Dakota State play-by-play voice Tyler Merriam, who adds the Jackrabbits are poised to make another deep run in the Missouri Valley Conference and FCS postseason. In addition to their all-conference linebacker Adam Bach of Solon, 9 other Iowa natives dot the roster. A final thought in just a minute on Fight for Iowa.
More of the Fight for Iowa podcast after this.
Here we go. Exciting adventures await. Grab your bucket list and keep the fun going all summer long. Pitch a tent, grab a sleeping bag, and sleep as a family under the stars. Fire up the grill and host a backyard barbecue. Visit a local trail for a hike or a drive to a state park for an all-day family adventure. With all there is to do this summer, we encourage you to get outside and make new memories. Whatever you do this summer, Scheels is right there with you.
This is the Fight for Iowa podcast. Here's the voice of the Hawkeyes, Gary Dolphin.
Kickoff for Iowa and South Dakota State is 11 o'clock Saturday morning, September 3rd in Kinnick Stadium, followed by Iowa State and Nevada. For tickets, call 1-800-IA-HAWKS or order online at HawkeyeSports.com. Thanks again to South Dakota State play-by-play voice Tyler Merriam. I'm Gary Dolphin. We'll talk again next week on Fight for Iowa. Go Hawks!
Hawkeye fans, remember to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Once you become a Fight for Iowa podcast subscriber, you'll automatically receive the latest episodes of the Fight for Iowa podcast, the Hawkeyes Voice podcast, Hawk Talk replays, exclusive game day content, and more. The preceding has been a Learfield presentation on the Hawkeye Sports Network.